Kenya. Thank you, and I hope you heard it. We record these webinars, and therefore, from now, whatever is said is documented. So I said, I'm David Musyoki from Kenya Hospices and Palliative Care Association, which is the umbrella body for palliative care providers in the country. And we are glad to be hosting this important session on financial investment and learning stuff around money. And since we have the experts in terms of handling money and people with wealth of information about wealth and wealth of important things in term, one of the important things in life, that is money. We are glad to have Mwenda Rarama and Paul Gisheru, who are from NCBA Bank. And they'll be taking us through the sessions. The sessions will be very insightful, and feel free to raise any questions that you have through the chat. And at some point after the presentation is done or midway through, I'm sure Mrarama will guide us in case we need some bit of feedback in terms of talk. One or two people might be allowed to speak, so that at least it is interactive, and we able to join in and discuss. I can see Dr. Zipporah Ali, the outgoing executive director. Probably towards the end, we'll give her a chance to say hi as she introduces the incoming executive director for Kehpca. But for now, allow me to invite Paul, who will gladly introduce our speaker, Mr. Mwenda. Kehpca banks or interacts with NCBA, and we've had good relationship. We're not promoting the bank, but when somebody or when an institution does a good job, I think it is great to acknowledge that, and especially since they are here with us, we acknowledge the support we've received from NCBA, and we continue to look forward to further interactions and great, working together, to progress in life and also to support the initiatives that we have. So since I know Mwenda will introduce himself fully, I didn't want to read his bio, but he will tell us more about himself when the baton is handed over to him. So Paul, I hand over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, David. Good evening, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to be in the company of healthcare professionals, and indeed the company of people from all over the country. I'm actually amazed at the places that we are getting audience from. It seems like we are cutting across the country. I've seen Garissa, I've seen Bungoma, I've seen Kilifi. That means we are cutting across the country. And so for us, it actually means we certainly need to provide the kind of information that would somewhat speak to some of the informational needs that all of us have. But the work of doing all that is actually what Mwenda will be taking us through today. Mine is just to give some bit of background as to who we are, where we come from, and what we do, and the partnership we're getting into with the hospice. So as David had said, we are from NCBA Bank. We work with a unit called NCBA Investment Banking, and a sub-unit called Wealth Management or Asset Management. And in asset management, what we do is to provide advice to our clients at the retail level and at the institutional level as to what they can actually do to maximize the value of the monies they have, and actually make sure that they stack the money in such a way that they're able to start the journey to wealth creation in a steady and in a consistent manner. And this always appreciates that all of us are very different stages as far as wealth creation is concerned. Some of us could be struggling. Some of us could be well off. Others have actually accumulated wealth, and others are actually looking at the potential for retirement, where then you're looking for what you've accumulated over time to then help you through the process of retirement. And we all have all these different objectives that needs to be met at different times. All those needs to be guided by one, how we manage what we earn, how we manage our investments to make sure that those investments are generating a return, and how we also manage the risks that those investments come with. And that's what we want to illuminate on a little today, so that each of us can get some sort of snippets as to what they could be thinking about. The always interesting thing about topics around wealth management is that rarely do you get anything new introduced. All we do is to actually give, a framework through which you could take, go through as you make your various investment decisions, so that at any point in time you can decide, am I better off buying land today, or am I better off buying a deposit with a bank? Am I better off putting money under the mattress rather, or am I better off going to buy stocks from the stock market? A question you ask yourself, am I better off spending the money today or deferring spending? And if I defer spending, then where do I put that money to make sure that money grows? That is what we'd want to engage more on. We truly hope that this conversation will be value adding to all of us in attendance. And we do look forward, to a very, a very active engagement. Feel free to keep keying in your questions. We're happy to respond to them as we carry on with the presentation, or even at the end of the presentation. And so, without much further ado, I want to hand over the mantle to Mwenda, who will take us through the content of the day. Over to you, Mwenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul and David. Welcome all to this particular session that we are having today. I hope you can all hear me. It's wonderful to see people from all over. Eldoret, Garissa, from Mombasa, from Garissa especially. It's quite a distance from where we are, but it's good to see that we're actually able to reach everybody out there. It's wonderful to have you in this session, and I hope that we'll walk the journey of building wealth together, getting to know more about each other, discuss a bit more. So feel free to chat at any time. I have sight of the chat, so if you have any questions, you can just chat them, and I should be able to have view of that and probably answer some of your questions. David, I hope I'm audible enough and I can start.
I'm not so sure whether it's my end, but seems can't get you very well, Mwenda.
Okay, anyone else having a problem? Paul, are we okay?
I can hear you quite well.
Okay. Okay, then let us just start off. So I'll start with a quick introduction of myself, very quick. As Paul mentioned, we work for NCBA Investment Bank, which is a subsidiary of NCBA the bank. I think we all know NCBA the bank. I came from a merger between NIC and CBA, which happened in very recently, about it's almost 2 years now, shocking enough. But I have worked in what you'd call investments for about 11 years. I started off as an analyst somewhere in a small subsidiary of Cooperative Bank, that is Kingdom Securities. For those of us who know, Kingdom Securities owned by Cooperative Bank. And I have walked the journey towards fund management, which is what I know now. I've been a trader. I've dealt with what you call stock brokerage, basically trading purposes on the Nairobi Stock Exchange. And now what I do is help each and every one of you build their wealth. I think from what was sent out, you can be able to see what I have done and what I've studied and all those details. So I'll not go through them, but basically that is who I am. And hopefully I should be able to enlighten you a bit more with my experience and get to know exactly what to do with your money. So what we'll cover today is we'll start with a few definitions, especially define what an investment is and what an asset is, because there is a difference between the two. We'll also walk through the wealth creation cycle. We look at the investment opportunities available in our market specifically. We'll discuss your spending, because most of the time people discuss the income side, but we forget that is actually also the expense side, which is which significantly impacts how you create your wealth. Because ideally, wealth is created by what remains behind. It's not how much you make, it's what remains behind that matters. And that is what you actually invest. We'll then focus on what Paul mentioned, mostly on unit trusts, just to get to know exactly, because unit trusts are basically what you'd start off as an investment. So it would be good to discuss that, and then we'll conclude on that. So to start us off, we'll start with a few questions, just for definition purposes. What an investment is. Feel free to type it in, or to ask any questions in between. But exactly what an investment is the fact that you're able to buy something, hoping that it actually will have value for you. For example, if you bought a car today, it is an investment. If you bought a house to live in, it is an investment. If you went ahead and probably bought shares, there's also an investment. If you bought a piece of land, it's also an investment. So anything that you buy and it will have value in future, probably, or make your life easier, make you comfortable, whatever you call it, including your household goods, they're still an investment as well. But then there's a difference between an investment and an asset, because an asset, on the other hand, actually earns you money. Either probably you've bought something and you're keeping it and you sell it 5 years down the line and the value will have gone up, or it will give you something coming in, whether it's monthly, whether it's daily. But the idea behind an asset is that you have actually bought something that gives you value and gives you financial inflows. This is now financial value. There's money coming in, and like an investment. A personal car that you drive from work to home every day does not generate income. Whereas if you've bought something that generates income, then that is an asset. That is what we are discussing today. A proper investment is actually something that is an asset. And like what you would say, if you bought a piece of land that is barren, it will probably appreciate in value. Yes, but then there's the issue of, is there money coming in to be able to generate a lot more in wealth? Are you actually growing a lot more in terms of your income? Because whatever comes in and you spend, whatever remains is actually what you invest. A true asset is something that gives you proper income. It actually gives you an income. It has two attributes, basically. It will have the aspect of capital appreciation, but it will also have income coming in. For example, if you buy a house and you have a tenant in it, the tenant pays you every single month what you call rent. But on top of that, the house also appreciates in value. So that is what you'd call a true asset, something that has both capital appreciation, which is basically driven by what you call inflation, because inflation is what drives the value of items. Today, we are all crying that life has become expensive, and the reason it has become expensive is because of inflation. That inflation has an impact on anything that has value. It goes up in value depending on the level of inflation that we have. If we may give an example of what you'd call assets, for example, if you have cash and you put that probably somewhere in a bank, you expect to be paid some interest. But then again, your cash is preserved in value. It does not depreciate, given the fact that you have inflation coming into place. So other than the fact that it's actually just cash, it still is expected to have some interest. So if you have money lying in your current account, then ideally, you wouldn't call that what you would call an asset. Yes, you have funds, but you need to put that probably in a fixed deposit to earn some interest from it and preserve its value accordingly. We have what you call fixed income investments. I'm sure we probably may have heard of what you call bonds, whether they are issued by the government or issued by anyone else, whether we are talking about treasury bills as well. As we keep discussing, we discuss that. I think probably a couple of us may have heard of shares, what you call stocks as well. That is also what you'd call an asset. Property, yes, is also an asset at the end of the day, especially if it has inflows that are coming in, then it is a proper asset. Any asset is supposed to ensure that it actually gives you something in return. It has an income that is flowing out of it. We have what we call investment funds, and we will discuss unit trust in particular towards the end of the session. But an investment fund ideally is something you put money in, the funds are invested, and you earn something out of it. It provides you a lot of flexibility, which we shall discuss even as we go forward. Now, let's talk about wealth creation. Wealth creation basically means, one, you have earnings. What is an earning? An earning is an income that is related, that has, when you less the expenses that come with it, is something that remains. So you have an income. Let's even give an example of salary. So you have a salary that comes in. When the salary comes in, you have taxes that you pay, you have expenses that you pay, but something else remains at the end of the day. Now, that which remains is what you usually put aside. So once you remove all the taxes that you pay, you have an income, less the taxes that you pay and any other related expenses to it. You have an earning. That is what you would call ideally maybe a net salary. Then once you have the net salary, you have your living expenses, you have rent to pay, you have transportation to pay for yourself from work to wherever you're living. What remains behind is what you'd call savings. So what do you do with those savings? Ideally, you're able to invest these savings. You're able to put them aside as an investment, whether that investment is in a proper asset or in any other way. You're actually able to put aside some of that money that remains behind, basically as savings, as an investment. Now that investment, which ideally you put aside, whether it's for emergency purposes or as a reserve for future use, ideally, that's what we are discussing. Now, that ideally should be invested in a way that it's actually an asset that earns you something. So it is not lying in a bank account somewhere or under your mattress or something. It actually is supposed to earn you something. Whatever it is, it's not an issue of quantity, but whatever it is, whether it's a shilling or it's 2 million shillings, it's supposed to earn you something. Now, what it earns grows its value. Because if it doesn't earn something, then that big animal we call inflation ideally eats into it. So the little that you have becomes less and less, and life becomes more and more expensive. But the idea is to put something aside for future use and invest it in a way that it actually earns something and grows. Now you need to build a habit of investing. And now that is what leads to growing your wealth, where you have a habit of saving and putting the savings aside, investing the same, and what has been invested, earning something. And as it earns, and as you create that habit of actually putting something aside, you earn higher and higher and higher amounts of money from what you've put aside. And as you earn more and more from what you've put aside, then your wealth grows. You actually have a big buffer somewhere that you know, in case of anything or whatever it is that may happen, I am able to take care of myself. I'm able to generate enough income to take care of myself, because the wealth ideally creates for you enough income to be able to sustain yourself, sustain those around you, and live a more elaborate and more comfortable life. And we all know that having enough to take care of yourself, whether health-wise or any other way, of course, has a big impact on the kind of lifestyle you live and the kind of expectations you have, even as you grow older. So for a younger person, ideally, this is a time you have income that you may find is a bit of an excess. I'll give an example. When I received my very first salary, having come straight from campus, I really was shocked. You have come from spending hundreds to earning a few thousands. It was not a lot of money, I can assure you, but the impact of that is significant, because what you could spend, what was your expenditure in a month, ideally is you earn 3-4 times of that. It gets you very confused. It was a lot of money. I didn't know what to do with it. But the funny thing with life is a lot of changes happen in between. So you find within a very short period of time, what you thought was a lot of money now is not enough to sustain you. So at some point, you had more than enough earning to spend. At another point, you have a lot less, and you're wondering, how are you going to even budget it out? How are you going to fit it in? So as you begin off in life, you find you may and should ideally be in a position where you can keep your expenses low and save a lot more. And as you save that, that generates a lot more income, so that when the time comes for you to actually start spending, probably when you do start a family or something of the sort, then you're in a position to be able to generate a bit more to take care of that. The same thing happens as you grow older. One day you retire. Once you retire, most of the income that you are getting disappears. But your expenses, despite you thinking they will reduce significantly, they actually don't reduce significantly. And some of the expenses that you didn't have in the past start going up. For example, health expenses start going up. So if you didn't put enough aside to be able to probably pay for a good health insurance, which becomes very expensive in old age, then you find an issue. You find you're not able to take care of yourself health-wise. So the idea behind this is that life has a cycle. And as you go through that cycle, you need to interrogate yourself, find out at what point in life you're able to save a lot more, and at what point in life you are actually spending a lot more. And if you're able to get that balance, then you find at any one time you have enough to be able to take care of the expenses that you have and sustain your life and live a more comfortable life. Now, we have discussed investments, and you have said you earn. From your earnings, you create, you have a saving. Once you have that saving, you need to invest. But the question is, what do you invest in? Ideally, we have a short list here of what you would be looking to invest in. But remember, as I said, a proper asset ideally should have two components. You should have what you call capital appreciation, and you should also have interest. Or if it's not a capital appreciation, then it should actually preserve the value of what you have. So instead of having it reducing value from inflation, then ideally it should be able to at least preserve the value of what you have. Now, when you look at money market securities, which ideally would mean you have money and you invest in money itself, you're not buying anything, you're actually making an investment of money. So you're taking money, putting it in a fund, what we call a money market fund, or you're putting it in a bank as a deposit, whether it's a fixed deposit or a call deposit. You're giving it to the government, because what you'd call treasury bills is ideally lending to the government. So these are short-term investments of less than a year. So the longest treasury bill we have is 1 year, probably that is the level you're looking at. So you're looking at short-term investments of about 1 year. Now that is what we call money market securities, and there are different types. One you lend to banks, the other one you put in a fund, the other one you actually lend to the government. But all these are periods of about 1 year. What they do is preserve the value of what you have. So they pay you an interest. They should ideally pay you an interest higher than inflation to ensure that the value of your funds are basically secure. Now, the idea behind this is that you may not have a lot of money to invest at the beginning. You're building wealth, so the money is being accumulated. Now, when it's little, you're not able to buy a bigger and bigger asset. You're not able to invest in large amounts. So the small amounts, what do you do with them? Your 1,000, your 2,000, your 5,000 shillings, your 50,000 shillings, your 100,000 shillings, as you wait probably for the millions, what do you do with that money? You put it in a place that it actually preserves its value, and you earn something over and above inflation in short-term periods of time. And as the amount builds, then you move on to a longer investment, what we would call fixed income securities. So you have what you call treasury bonds, you have what you call corporate bonds. What a corporate bond is that you're actually lending to a company. So you are lending to a company and they are paying you a certain rate of return, which is ideally, you're looking at periods of about 5 years. 5 years or so. Most of the corporate bonds are about that period. So you're putting money for a longer period, slightly higher amounts, of course, and the end result of that is that you have a higher return coming in for your investment, way higher than what you'd have as inflation. The same thing happens. You have treasury bonds. Now, these are also long-term. I think the longest treasury bond we have seen is a 30-year. That was issued some time back, but we also have a 25-year that was issued this year. So you're putting money aside. You're actually lending to the government for a certain period, whether it's 5 years, whether it's 10 years, whether it's 15 years. The longest they have currently this year is 25 years. So you have lent to the government for 25 years. They are paying you a certain level of return, which is higher than what your short-term investment would pay you, higher than what your bank would pay you, higher than what your money market funds would pay you, higher than what T-bills would pay you. Because the longer you invest your money, the higher the return you expect from it. So there must be a commensurate return for putting money aside for a longer period of time. Now, that lending, whether to governments, whether to companies, ideally goes in for quite a bit of time. Now, the same thing happens. You have shares. What you're doing, listed shares on an exchange, whether it's unlisted shares or whether it's a business that you have decided to buy into and take ownership, whether you invest in an equity fund. An equity fund basically means you put money in a fund and that fund specifically invests in shares. So instead of you going and buying shares directly, you actually put money in a fund and this fund decides, or as a management, company that basically decides what to buy, when to sell. So you don't have to go into the nitty-gritties of being able to track your shares and buy left, right, and center. So what shares give you is basically ownership. So you're moved from lending, because you are lending now to government, you are lending to companies. Now you are buying the company, you're buying a share of the company, whether it's 1% of the company, whether it's 0.001% of the company. But depending on the amount of money you have, you're now buying into something. You're actually buying, whether it's a company or something else. Now, a company ideally will pay you dividends. So you have a dividend coming in, whether it's every half year or 1 year. So you have that coming in. But then again, the value of the company goes up as it trades or as it does its own business. For example, those who bought Safaricom at the IPO at 5 shillings, it's now trading at about 40 shillings. So the value of the company has significantly grown. We have seen the growth of Safaricom. Most of us, ideally at this age and older, have definitely seen the growth of Safaricom. We have seen it grow from being a small department in the government to what it is now, today, one of the biggest companies we have in East and Central Africa. So end result is, as that grows and as the institution grows, then your ownership, that share of ownership that you have, that small portion of the company that you actually own grows in value, and that you will see. But even as that grows, the company will also pay out of what it has made as income, it has spent, it has little that has remained. Some of it will be invested and some of it will be paid out to the owners. Basically, you'll earn a dividend out of it. So that gives you an either semi-annual or annual income that comes with it. But on top of that, you have the capital appreciation bit of it. Then you have the very long-term investments, ideally, which would be property, that would be land, that would be housing and buildings, that would be real estate investment trusts, and converters into real estate investments. Now, land is a really long-term investment. We're about 20 years for treasury bonds. You have bought a piece of land somewhere. One, it's extremely liquid. If today you bought a piece of land and wanted to sell it tomorrow, the likelihood of you being able to get another buyer is quite difficult. So it's quite liquid. So you're actually investing in an asset that definitely has to be a very long time of period. Now, these investments, as you see them, also you discuss the risks that come with them. Now, the shorter the period of investment, the lower the risk, which means the lower the return. So you have your money market funds, which will give you the lowest return, or basically money market securities. Then your fixed income securities, which will give you a higher return, but they are all risk-free, ideally. So you have lent to the government, which means there's no risk that you're taking. So the return reflects that risk portion of it. Now, when you move on to buying companies, that company can one day become 100 shillings per share. It can also go to 0 per share. That company can actually be closed. We have seen companies that have been closed and delisted from the securities exchange. So there's the risk that comes with it. But then again, the return that comes with it is also commensurate, because you're taking a very high risk, you expect a very high return. So you're investing for a very long period of time, probably 5 years and beyond. There's a risk that comes with it, but that also has its rewards. Now, property as well, a very long-term investment, extremely liquid, because the liquidity comes with the longer the period of investment you're making. If you're making an investment for a short period of time, then you know within a year, if you're investing in a money market security, either you get your money back or you're able to get your money back in less than a year, depending on what exactly you've invested in. If you have put money away for 5 years, lent into the government, then you know in 5 years your money will come back. You've put money in shares and stocks. If they are tradable, then you know you can be able to sell them within a year or 2 years. But ideally, it is also a long-term investment. Then you have the very long-term investments and very liquid, which would be property. So you put money aside, and the likelihood is that you'd probably have quite a bit of time in between before you. Yes, Stephen, I can see your question. I'll come to that as we progress towards the investment. Now, that, of course, as I was saying, property is a long-term investment, quite a bit of risks that come with long-term investing, and the same you expect to be commensurate accordingly in terms of return. Now, Spending discipline. I think one of the very main things that we need to look at is spending discipline. But before we come to that, let me just answer a quick question that Stephen Musyoki has asked here. Can you say something about cryptocurrency? Currently, is it the right time to invest in cryptocurrencies? Now, there are very many ways of making money. You can actually literally, I usually say you can make money from anything. People made money from pyramid schemes. People have made money from anything, but the same thing that happens with making money is exact opposite that happens. The higher the risk, the higher the return. That is what most of the people say. But remember as well, the higher the risk, the higher the loss. You can actually buy an item and 2 days, 3 days down the line, you've made 1,000,000 shillings, but you have also the opportunity of losing everything. So ideally, anything that everything has its risks. So if you are going to invest in cryptocurrencies, you need to the risks that come with it, because those risks determine either the return or the loss that you're going to make. Now, everything that you put money into, you can make money out of. Someone is asking about network marketing. At the end of the day, I said you can make money out of anything, but the same thing, you can lose money out of anything. You can meet with someone on the street and you lose your money. What's the risk? That is what you need to estimate. When someone stops you in Nairobi, what is the risk of you helping or not helping? Most people will tell you in this city of ours, the risk is quite high. So most of the time you just run. But then again, you may never know what situation you find yourself in. So whatever it is that you're looking at, it is important to actually evaluate the risks that come with it. Now, if the risks make sense to you, if you're going to put money, let me give a good example, which is quite recent actually, betting. When you decide to go and bet, the likelihood of you losing everything that you've put in that bet is very high. The likelihood of you making a lot of money as well is very high, which means the risk is very high. So if you are putting money aside that you know you can lose, then well and good. But if it's money that you know you can't lose, then why would you bet? You have a wedding tomorrow and you need to pay people. You go and bet that money. You have no money. What happens to the wedding tomorrow? So at the end of the day, the risks that come with every single investment that you make is what you need to evaluate. Is it worth it? That is a question that you need to ask yourself. What you have and what you're looking at, you need to discuss that. Now, if you are 25 years, 30 years, 35 years of age, starting off in life, don't have a lot of income coming in, then the little that you have, you really need to preserve it. You cannot take high risks with it. Yes, we say you're young, but at the end of the day, there's an amount that you must preserve to ensure that you live a comfortable life and be able to take care of yourself. The same thing, as you grow older, you find that you can only take so much in terms of risk, because if you lose what you have, you're not able to take care of yourself. So at the end of the day, every amount that you invest in, as much as you segregate it, you need to know what the risks are. Network marketing as well has its risks. You can make a lot of money, but it also has a risk of that you cannot make anything despite making investments. So every single item that you're looking at, you must look at the risks that come with it and whether it is worth it. Now let's quickly discuss what we call our expenditure side of it, because our income side of it is quite variant. There's a lot that you can put money in. What you need to ensure is that you look at the risks that comes with it. Now, on the other hand, because to be honest, most of what we call income and most of what we call investments, they have a way that they work. They have something that they earn you. But remember, we said what remains behind is what matters. The question is, what is more important to you? Is it how much you make, or is it how you spend it? Because you can make 1,000,000 shillings, but if you're going to pump it all in a club in one night and tomorrow you have nothing, no one will remember you made 1,000,000 shillings the previous day. And that, of course, will have its financial impact on you. The kind of lifestyle you live going forward, of course, it will have an effect on it. We have habits that we build. We have said you need to build a habit of creating wealth. You need to build a habit of saving and putting money aside. Now, as you do that, you also need to build habits around your expenditure, because you need to grow the gap between your incomes and expenses. Now, the thing is, it has to be consistent. These are habits that you're talking about. Habits mean practices that you have undertaken over a long period of time, and they have become part and parcel of you. These habits is what makes you who you are. It is what makes you wealthy, because those habits build you over a period of time, and you live a certain lifestyle that basically is sustainable, because the idea behind it is sustainability. I think you have heard of companies talking about going through sustainability analysis and being informed whether the institution itself is actually sustainable. You also need to look at your life and ask yourself, is my life sustainable? Can I live this kind of life I'm living for the foreseeable future? Can I live this life I'm living for the next 25, 30 years? What do I need to do to ensure that if I'm living a good life, I can live this life for the next 25, 30 years? What things do I need to do to ensure that it is actually sustainable? You need to grow the gap between your incomes and expenses, because that gap, which we call savings, is what determines how you live your life 25 years from now. Otherwise, if you spend everything that is coming in, end result is 25 years from now, we'll say you worked for a very long time, worked very hard, but unfortunately, you have nothing to show for it. 1 year down the line, 2 years down the line, you've been working, you've earned something, you've been running a business, you've made something. Is there something to show for it? Do you have something that remained behind, or all you have is experiences? That is a question that you really need to ask yourself. You need to ensure that you're frugal in your spending. Ensure that you actually cut on your expenses as much as possible. You need to practice being conscious in your spending. Don't be a spendthrift, because if you spend the little savings you have, you must work hard to save once again towards whatever it is that you wanted to do. Focus on the big wins. Focus on ensuring that you actually cut your expenses as much as possible, especially the big ones, whether it's housing, whether it's transportation. Those big expenses is what you need to ensure that you actually focus on. Now, I'll give a session just to have you ask a few questions at this point before we move on. Ensure that also you remember that you have expenses which are annual, whether it's for insurance purposes or whatever other purposes. Ensure that you actually put money aside to foot that. If you can be able to put that money aside on a monthly basis, if your income is monthly, then that of course will make a very big difference for you and make it easier for you to pay the annual expenses that you have. And as I wait for you to type out questions, I'll just give a few facts. The Kenya National Bureau of Statistics actually analyzes our expenditures as a country and as a people. And I don't know how many of us have ever been able to look at those figures, but I'll give you a few details of the same. For example, the people in Northeastern, for the person in Garissa, they actually spend 58% of the expenditure, 58% is actually on food. We know why. It's a dry place, there's a shortage of food, so food is expensive. And that circumstance, of course, has an impact on your life, a definite impact. So you need to know in which place you are, in what circumstances you are. You need to look at what age you are, because depending on the age you are, you also have ways of spending. So there are different things that you need to look at. And when it comes to expenditure, it's not one fits all. It's not a jacket that we can all wear. Everybody has specific expenditures, which are significant depending on their life and the times that they are in. Another example, Nairobi is divided into 3 regions, basically in terms of expenditure. Let me just see whether I can get that for you to make it easier for us to have the discussion. And in Nairobi, we have the lower, the middle class, and ideally the upper. Now, the funny thing is that 72% of the people in Nairobi are actually stratified as being on the lower expenditure side of the region. So 72%, which means 72% of us are basically not earning a lot. You may think people are making a lot of money, but the funny thing is 72% of them are considered not to be making a lot. They're actually not spending a lot. They are not considered to be high spenders. Whereas in the middle, you have 24%, but the high spenders, the people who you would call wealthy, the people who would actually call the people who actually run the Nairobi, it's only 4%. That is what you'd call the high spenders in this city of ours. So according to the National Bureau of Statistics, if you look at the amounts being spent and how people spend, because that of course speaks to incomes, then you find a big chunk of us are not considered to be high spenders for different reasons. Now, if you go down and look lower, a bit more details into the lower class, you find that 42% of the expenditure is actually on food. For the lower class of Nairobians in terms of expenditure. So a big chunk of their money, a whole 42% in this Nairobi of ours, is actually being spent on food, where else the middle spends 22 and the upper spends only 7% of what they earn on food. Now, if you dig deeper in this class of the lower expenditure population, you find that 12% of it is actually spent on bread and cereals. That is breakfast. So you earn 100 shillings, and out of that 100 shillings, 12 shillings is actually spent on breakfast, your bread and cereals. Where else, the people who make a lot of money, they only spend about 1.7% of it on their breakfast. So depending on the situation you are and how you are, you need to analyze yourself and see how much do I spend on what? Because at the end of the day, you can cut on some of these expenditures. Now, the funny thing is for the upper class, where else they spend very little on food, which is quite frugal, actually, about 7%. They spend 27% on transport. They're the people driving your guzzlers. So they're the people fueling their cars off and on. They are never on matatus. They never walk anywhere. So the other people actually spend a lot more on transportation. So you have a full exchange between what is being spent on food and what is being spent on transportation on opposite sides, because the law, on the other hand, only spends 7% of what they make on transportation. So depending on what situation you are in and where you are, you need to look at the issues and basically look at yourself and analyze yourself and know how do you fall in terms of your expenditures. What do I spend most on and what do I spend least on? What am I supposed to be spending most on, depending on my situation in life, and what am I supposed to be cutting on? Because these expenses change with time. You find that as you grow older, you spend a lot more on health. As you are young, you spend a lot less on health as well. As you family grows, you spend a lot more on food, and when you're alone, you spend a lot less on food. So you need to analyze your expenditures and know what is high at what time, and what can I cut, or what do I need to manage? What are the big expenses in my life that I need to cut to ensure that I have a lot more remaining behind and not spending everything that I actually make? So your earnings power may bring wealth, but your frugality and your thriftness will keep it. You can make a lot of money, especially at a young age and over a very long period of time. But at the end of the day, what remains behind is determined by your habits in terms of how you spend money. That is what you need to watch out for. That is what determines a wealthy individual and one who makes money, because we all have an opportunity to make money. The question is, what remains behind? After you've made all this money, what remains behind? That is what we call wealth. I have seen no questions, so we'll just move on. Now, we'll discuss unit trusts, and specifically we're discussing unit trusts because they help you to slowly grow your wealth. They're the starting point in wealth creation. Where are they the starting point in wealth creation? One, they provide you a lot of liquidity. If you put money aside and there are monies that you may need for investment and for whatever other reasons, you need to be able to access that money as and when you need it. Now, unit trust funds enable you to access your money as and when you need it. So what we have are three kinds of unit trusts. We have what we call money market funds. So you're taking Kenya shillings that you invest in, and the minimum for that is 5,000 shillings. And ideally, that is what you'd be spending. Now, when you look at the equity fund, on the other hand, you have a fund that invests specifically in shares. And that fund that invests specifically in shares, ideally would specifically be investing in shares. At the end of the day, you're talking about a minimum 5,000 shillings. The risk is higher but the return is also expected to be higher. But money market fund preserves the value of your funds. So you have small amounts that you're building up, probably saving for something, then ideally you don't want to lose that money. You don't put that money in a money market fund. Now, if you want to advance the same, you still want to enjoy the liquidity of your investment, but go a bit longer, take a bit more of risk, then you'd look at the equity fund. You also have a dollar investment fund, ideally minimum of 100 US dollars. If you think the currency you're holding today is a lot more in terms of risk, then ideally you'd be looking to put that in, either you have dollar expenses or you have dollar income that coming in, then you put that in a dollar investment fund. Whether you want to take exposure in a foreign currency, then you have a dollar investment fund to provide that for you. Now, the current rate that we have on the money market fund are about 8%. With your inflation levels at about 5%, then 8% would give you a return and preserve the value of your money as you look to deploy the same, or as you look to build your wealth from a starting point. We advise ideally between 10 to 20% of your income should be saved. So if you are looking to create wealth and you want to start by saving, then you should put aside at least 10 to 20% of what you earn, basically as a spending balance, away to ensure that you're able to grow your wealth. Of course, we expect as you grow in your wealth creation, you'll probably be able to put a bit more because you also have other incomes that will start coming in. So you can start off with whatever it is that is available, but ideally we'll talk about 10 to 20% of what is available. Now, the key features to consider is that if you're investing in something, you need to ensure that the risks are as low as possible. And now, are they regulated? Do you have a recourse in case anything happens to what you have put aside? All those are the things that you need to consider, because as much as you're investing, you need to consider the risks that come with it. So we have products that are regulated by CMA and the Retirement Benefit Authority as well, for those who are interested in pensions. And pensions ideally would mean you're putting away money for a very long period of time to be used when you retire. Now, we are used to company pensions, but we also have individual pension plans where you can put money as an individual. And I always ask, when you leave an institution and move to another one and you don't access all your pension, what happens to that small bit that remains behind? If you're taking out your pension, what happens to the pension when you leave one company, move to another one? Now, it will be very tedious, 25 years, 30 years after you've worked, to move across the 10, 20 companies you've worked in, chasing your pension. It's very difficult. But if you have an individual pension plan, then whatever it is that you have, you move it to this individual pension plan. It works like any other pension plan. You'll access it when you retire. But the beauty of that is that you're able to consolidate your money in one place. So that when you retire, you don't go chasing all the companies you've worked in, finding out who your pension is, but you're actually able to access your pension very easily because you've been putting it in one pool over the period of time that you have worked over your life. The other thing is that if your company doesn't provide your pension, then you do need pension. You need to think about your retirement and you need to put money aside. The individual pension plan as well provides that. So you're able to put money aside as an individual for your retirement on a monthly basis or whatever period of time you're looking at, but you are able to actually put money aside for the day that you'll actually retire. So that when you retire, you're able to sustain the lifestyle that you have been living. These products that you're talking about in terms of unit trusts operate like an investment group. What you'd call me, you, John, James come together, put money together, and then the funds become bigger and you're able to get a better return from it. So that is the idea between unit trusts. It's a trust that is regulated and authorized by CMA to collect money on behalf of individuals and invest on behalf of individuals. But remember, if we have 100 people who all have $1 million that they have brought in, then you have 100 million to invest. If you went to the bank or to anyone else with your 1 million shillings, you'll probably not be able to get the same return that someone with 100 million will get. So the idea is that let's pool together. Instead of going individually and getting very low returns, let's pool these funds, put them in a pool, and ideally invest in them as larger amounts, just like what you'd have in an investment group, and grow the value and be able to command a lot more in terms of return, given the size of money that you're investing. The assets that they invest in are also regulated. They will not go and invest in your unregulated and ideally unregulated assets as well. They are not long-term kind of assets. So you'll not find unit trusts investing in properties. You'll not find unit trusts investing in cryptocurrencies which are not regulated. They'll actually reduce the risk significantly. So what they're investing in is ideally what you'd call risk-free assets, or assets that have a significant reduction in risk, to ensure that your return and your money is safe. You will not wake up one day and find that you actually have no money. It's important to have objectives in your life and consider how much risk you can take and for how long you can invest. Once you consider those ones, then they actually help you in terms of how you put your money and where you put your money. So it's important to consider all those items and know what the objective is. Why are you putting the money aside? And how long are you putting that money for aside for? And how risky can the assets be? Is it money that you're willing to lose? Is it money that you can't lose? That determines how you actually are able to invest. The beauty with these funds is that they give you a lot of liquidity. You can put your money in any time of the day. It will earn you an income and it draw at any time. So you send us an instruction tomorrow at 10 a.m., you'll have your money by end of day. So if it's money that you're putting aside for emergencies or for anything else, then it is actually a funds that you'll be looking to invest in, because that gives you a lot of easy accessibility to your money. These are funds. These are funds that ideally would really help you in terms of planning yourself. In case of emergencies, this is money that is actually very easily accessible. And since Steve Musyoki asking whether it's good to have an emergency fund, it is important to have an emergency fund. It is important to put money aside to cater for any risk events that may happen in life. And that money needs to be in a place where it's not sitting idle, it's actually earning you something, but it's also easily accessible. So your money market funds and any other funds ideally would be something that you'll be looking at, because if in case you need that money, you send your instructions, you'll have your money at any one time. It's easily accessible, but it still earns you something. It's not sitting in a bank account somewhere earning you zero. There's a lot that goes into it in ensuring that your money is safe and your risks are taken care of, to ensure that the money you put aside in any fund that is regulated is earning you money and is safe. So that is one of the things that you need to look at even as you invest. At the end of the day, it's ensuring that the little that you have and that little that you have invested is actually safe. Because I always ask, if you work so hard to make 100,000 shillings, then take risk with it and lose the 100,000 shillings, then I'm back to zero. So whatever income I was chasing is irrelevant, because I've even lost the little that I had. So it's important to keep what you have safe. Don't take too much risk with it, even as you chase the income. At the end of the day, whatever the question of, you do not milk the cow to death. You ensure that the cow lives and you take only what you need. So you milk it, yes, but you ensure that the cow remains alive. Because if that cow is gone, then no matter how much milking you did, no matter how much income you made, it's irrelevant, because that income cannot be commensurate to what you invested. So as we conclude, I'll just say all investments should be driven by your objectives, as I have kept saying all along in this presentation. It is what exactly you intend to do with that money that drives the kind of investments that you're making. So if it's money meant for emergencies, you need to access it very easily. You put it in a fund that is easily accessible, but it still earns you something. It's money that you need 25 years from now for retirement purposes. Then you put it aside in a pension, so that when you retire, you have access to that money upon retirement. If it is money that you are meant to put aside for payment of your insurance that is actually annual, then you need to put the money aside depending on your income And when your income comes, if it comes on a monthly basis, put money aside on a monthly basis. So that insurance, when it comes due, you can access. Remember, this money also needs to be easily accessible. So you're putting it away for a year, so it's still a short-term investment. You probably put in a fund or something a lot shorter, but the idea is to be able to access that money as and when you need. So depending on what the money is meant for, what the objective of the investment is, then that determines what kind of asset you're going to put the money in. Because investing is not the end objective. There must be a reason behind why you're putting money aside. That reason behind why you're putting that money aside is what drives the kind of asset you actually invest in, and for how long, and all those details. So objectives would be, for example, a short-term objective of putting money aside for a certain period of time, ideally for short-term for spending purposes, whether they are need short or medium term. You'd have holding priorities to basically you're putting money aside to invest in something else. For example, you're putting money aside to buy land. So if you're putting money aside to buy land, or you're putting money aside to buy an institution, you're putting money aside to start a business, you're putting aside to invest in a business, whatever it is, you're putting money aside short term, ideally to be invested for a medium time period of time or a long time as well. You're trying to beat inflation and grow the value of your assets. So you're looking at capital gains, you're looking at ensuring that income comes in that compounds the growth of the same. So there are different reasons why you'd be putting money aside, and it's important to know those reasons because those reasons is what ideally drives your reasons, your investment period. You're putting money aside to diversify. You just want to buy a particular asset, ideally for diversification purposes. Let me give an example. If today everything I have is land, then there's a risk that comes with it. So I need to put money aside, buy a different asset, so that if land prices were to collapse, I still would have an asset or something else that would actually sustain me. So at the end of the day, we need to diversify. You cannot put all your eggs in one basket. So if you find that all your eggs are in one basket, you need to put money aside to diversify the same, to invest money in something else. If you have, let's say, for example, you have just come from doing your master's and you're planning to do your PhD, then your fees to pay, you need to put money for that. It may be 10 years from now that you're planning to do your PhD. So do you wait until then and go to the bank and take a loan and pay for it? Or do you put money aside, ensure that it still earns, it compounds itself, and you're able to pay? The same thing with retirement, the same thing with, I have a piece of land, I want to come and construct my house one day. Do I wait for that time and take a mortgage, or do I put money aside and basically construct? There are all kinds of ways of looking at it, but your goals and your objectives, of course, determine how you invest. Maybe you've invested in assets that are all taxable. The challenge with that is that it reduces your earnings significantly. So you're putting money aside and every single coin you earn, the government takes 15% of it. Do you want to look at assets where you're actually not taxable? So you need to look at, as you look at assets and as you look at the risks that come with it, you also need to look at the taxation bit of it. If it's not taxable, you earn a lot more in terms of income. But if it is taxable, then the taxation bit of it takes away from the earnings, and your net earnings are lower than ideally they would be. So at various times in your life, you'll have to deal with very many objectives, very many reasons as to why you make the decisions you make, as to why you invest what you invest, and why you invest it where you invest it. And all that has its headaches, but at the end of it all, it means most likely you'll end up having multiple assets. And that is a beautiful thing. Don't put money in one basket, have multiple assets, and all these assets will have different objectives. They'll have different things in your life that they're actually addressing. And with that, you know if it's an issue of an emergency and where the money comes from. If it's an issue of something long-term and where the money will come from when that time comes. So for all of them, for all your expenditures and everything else that you're planning in your life, all those objectives you have, you need to have an asset that replicates the same. whether it's short term, whether it's medium term, whether it's long term. So structure all of those foreseen or expected expenditures and ensure that the end result is you have something that basically you're building to alleviate the same or to be able to take care of the same expenses. So that brings us to the end of my presentation. And at this time, I think David and Tim will have a Q&A. I've answered a few of the questions that came, actually 2 questions that came as I was speaking. And we'll give this time to anybody else who may have questions to just ask. Someone is asking, there's what we call hand to mouth, such that what you are earning is not much, and most of what you're taking as you're putting aside is actually probably you don't have the capacity to save. These are realities in life. You can actually be earning just enough to sustain you, but the beauty with life is that it has cycles. And as you live through these cycles, because if you're earning just enough to sustain yourself, it becomes difficult for you to save. So you don't kill yourself over it, because at times we discuss issues of depression and all these difficulties that come with it. So the reality is the reality. If your life is at a certain stage and there's only so much you can do, then you do what you need to do. So if you have a situation where everything that comes in, you're spending, then you may not be able to do much about it. If you can cut expenses, maybe it's not possible for you to cut expenses. Maybe it's not possible for you to create a different line of income. But life has cycles. As you go through that cycle, ensure that you go through it and come to the end of it. And when you come to the end of it, then you'll have learned your lessons. You'll have prepared yourself for what is coming. So as we discuss savings, you may not have much to save, but at the end of the day, get to know about it, get to learn, because the idea behind all these items is actually learning. So the more information you collect and the more you actually get to know, then it might prove to be quite useful when that time comes. I think one of the things that COVID has taught us is that things can change in a second. You wake up one day and everything is okay. You hear the world talking about a plague somewhere in China, and in a month, 2 months, it's in Kenya and you're now in lockdown. You probably, the business you're doing has been affected. A lot of things that have changed all of a sudden. Things have gone bad. But for other people, on the other hand, things actually did turn out to be a lot better when they were in lockdown. So a lot of things change, and everybody's situation and life is different. So as the change comes, prepare for it. Because if you're not ready for the change, if you don't prepare yourself to know what to do with money when it comes, when you don't have it, the moment it comes, you'll be as confused as I was when I earned my first salary and didn't know what to do with the money. So at the end of the day, we need to prepare ourselves for what we call the future. And living a difficult life doesn't mean that life will not get better. It will, but prepare for that period and that time.
Wow, great learning, lots of information. Many thanks, Mwenda. If you have any question, please feel free to type it, or if you could raise your hand if you want to speak, we'll be able to unmute and allow you to speak. And as we do that, I'm not so sure whether the percentage from unit trust, there was a question from Asaf, Dr. Kinyanjui, was asking what's the average interest rate for unit trust. I'm not so sure whether that was handled within the discussion.
I actually mentioned it's about 8%. So I mentioned it's about 8%, which is higher than the 5% inflation. So that, of course, is something you'll be looking at in terms of ensuring that you preserve the value of your money and earn a bit more than inflation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Makilin Atieno asks, please comment on considering education as an investment.
Okay, so as we said, an investment, unlike an asset, an investment is something that you consider to have value. And that is what I started with, saying that if you buy a personal car that moves you from work to your house, it's not an asset. It's not earning any return, but it's offering you comfort. It's still an investment. It's something that you consider to have value in your life. Now, if you consider education as an investment, yes, it is something that you consider to have value in your life. It is an investment. But whether it's an asset, that's a whole different story, because at the end of the day, you're putting money into something. That whatever you put money into should generate an income out of it. So are you going to school and investing in this schooling to be able to get a higher paying job? Are you investing to give you skills to start a business? The reason behind it, the objective, because the objective is what determines what is what. So when you talk about objectives, that determines what is the objective of you investing in education. That is what you need to interrogate. What are the risks that come with it? There's a risk, maybe you're going to education, you're actually going to school hoping to get another job. What if you don't get another job? That is a risk. How do you manage that risk? How do you ensure that despite you having invested in education and getting no return out of it, it does not frustrate you and make your life a lot more difficult or make your life impossible? So everything has its risks. You need to consider that, and the objectives basically drive the investments that you make. So some of the non-taxable incomes, I'll just give, assets, I'll just give one example, and it's what we call infrastructure bonds. We have heard of the government borrowing, and the government borrows in terms of what we call treasury bonds or bills, but it also borrows in what we call infrastructure bonds. Now, treasury bonds are taxable. They're basically taxable items, taxable over the periods that you have invested in. But infrastructure bonds are basically meant specifically for infrastructure. And for that reason, they're actually not taxable. So if you're looking at a taxable asset that is long-term, an untaxable asset that is long-term, then you'll be talking about an infrastructure bond. But most of the other assets that you have ideally would be taxable. Rental income never used to be taxable, it's now taxable. So quite a number of items other than infrastructure bonds would actually be what you call taxable. Someone is asking about annuities and how they're calculated. That I may not be able to cover here, but you can reach out to us. We'll guide you on how they're calculated. I think, David, you can provide our email to them, and they can just send us a short email. We'll get them on how they're calculated. But what an annuity is that you're putting money that will be paid over a period of time. So for example, I take 1 million shillings today, I invest it maybe at 10%, and I expect to pay maybe for the next 15 years. So that is the calculation that I'm doing. So I'm taking a lump sum, putting that aside, but it will pay me a monthly for a certain period of time. How long can it pay you and how much is it earning determines how much you're going to be earning for that period. So that is what we would call an annuity. It's a forward payment from a lump sum, and that whatever the lump sum is and what it is earning and the period of time you're putting that money away will determine how much you're being paid on a monthly basis for that period. Most of this is discussed when you get your pension, whether do you take out your money or do you put in an annuity that pays you on a monthly basis for probably for the rest of your life. Now, that is something that is calculated by most insurance companies, and they offer you a certain amount for a certain period of time, but that differs from person to person. Now, Platinum is a company, and what we have said about companies is they borrow. Now, we have different ways in which companies borrow. They borrow from corporate bonds. Most corporate bonds are regulated by CMA. They actually are authorized to borrow. For example, right now we have Family Bank that is looking to borrow. Family Bank has gone to CMA, told them we want to borrow for 5 years. And this is the rate that we want to pay the investors that give us money for that period of 5 years. CMA is interrogated, looked at the company and seen whether the company actually does that will be there for the next 5 years. will this company deliver this return it's talking about? Is it a company that we would want the public to invest in for these 5 years? The authority has done its part. It has done the due diligence and given them an approval. So they have been given an approval to go ahead and source money from the public. We also have companies that don't go to CMA. They don't go and get approval for CMA, but they can still borrow from you. The same way a friend will borrow from you. So Platinum borrows from the public. It has its risks that come with it. One, you're talking about an unregulated property. So who has done the due diligence? And if the due diligence has been done, are you able to do it yourself? If you're not able to, then you need to ensure that it's actually been done. Is it a company that you know? Are you confident that if you're giving money for the next 5 years or the next 2 years, that company will be in existence for 2 years? Given that it's not regulated, then probably to be promising a lot more. There's a lot more risk that comes in it. Now that risk has to be compensated. So unlike Family Bank that will probably pay you about 13%, you'd want Platinum to compensate you for that risk, that they are selling you something that has not gone through the regulator's due diligence, so they have to pay you a higher return. Now, whether that higher return is worth it, that is a question you need to ask yourself, because there's a risk that comes with it. The risk that this company, you're probably not able to analyze, it may not be there for the next 5 years. That risk must be compensated. But then again, as an individual, you need to ask yourself whether that risk is worth it. So if that risk is worth it for you, then you make the investment. If the risk is not worth it, depending on the level of risk that you have analyzed and looked at, then ideally you don't make the investment. So everything, and it's also determined by the objective. This money that you actually invest in Platinum and any other unregulated or institution that has not been given approval by CMA, that money that you're actually giving them, what is the objective behind it? Is it money that you're willing to lose, or is it money that you can't afford to lose? So if you can't afford to lose, then you have to put in a low risk investment. That is what I have to say about that. Any other questions, David?
Yes, I can see some questions from the Q&A from Anne Michael. Would you advise to save on a SACCO or buying bonds?
Okay, let me start with Anne Michael. Now, Anne Michael, a savings cooperative ideally means members have come together. It's a form of chama. So members have come together, they have put together funds, and they borrow from each other. They borrow from that pool. So unlike any other, this is a situation where you have saved in a cooperative and you're able to borrow from this cooperative. There are limits that come from it. There are concessional rates come from it, because it's the same as you have a chama, but you're borrowing. But in this case, it's a regulated entity, so the risk is a lot lower. And it's an entity that you probably may be in a better place to look at, because they provide you the financials and a bit of analysis of the same. So that is very different from buying a bond, because ideally you're buying a bond that will earn you an income. It's risk-free, but if you have no objective ideally of borrowing, if you need to borrow, you have to go to a bank. So, and that of course gives you a concessional rate or may not be a cheaper rate. So both of them would probably be driven by the objective behind it. Why are you putting this money aside? If you're putting the money aside for a certain purpose or for a certain reason, how accessible is it? A bond, you know how long of a period you invest in it. A SACCO, on the other hand, how easy is it to access the money? Are you able to borrow? All those issues, you need to look at them, because the objective behind this money would actually drive you towards what exactly to look at. So as long as it's regulated, it's safe. SACCOs are safe. But then again, you really need to know whether it's a SACCO, because we have institutions that people have come up with, registered them, called them SACCOs, but they're actually not SACCOs. So you need to go find out from SASRA if these institutions are actually SACCOs. You need to do your own due diligence on this institution, even as you put money aside. If it's, of course, a SACCO started by the institution you work in, it makes things a lot easier, but any other SACCOs out there, there's a risk that comes with it. So you need to analyze that and get to find out. Now, someone asks, is the minimum 5,000, is the 5,000 minimum, and that must be to contribute monthly or can deposit depending on earnings? Yes, the minimum is 5,000 shillings. And from there on, you can invest any amounts that you want, whether it's on a monthly basis, whether it's daily basis. When you get the money, you just deposit, and the same will be invested. as it comes in. So the money is invested on a daily basis. Even if you hold the money for 3 days, we'll pay you interest for those 3 days. So as and when the money comes, then you make the investment. Then Belinda is asking, what is the role of CMA in overseeing money market funds? Asking because I am yet to get a proposition of my funds after some entity closed. Now, Belinda, it's very important for you to know whether the fund you're investing in is actually regulated. CMA does indicate the institutions that they regulate and the funds that they regulate if you go to their website. Now, if I came up with a fund and claimed that it's regulated, it's very different from one that is regulated. And I may not claim it's actually regulated. I may actually come up with a fund and sell it to the public, ideally as an individual. And I will not even say whether it's regulated or not. So it's very important for you to get to find out if actually that fund was regulated by CMA, because if it was regulated by CMA, then it's a very different situation because CMA comes in to ensure that you actually recover your money. The institution itself might have been regulated by CMA, but the fund was not regulated by CMA because as an institution, you have an authority. For example, you're an investment bank. What an investment bank has authority to do is come up with products that they can sell to their clients going forward. We choose whether to have that product that you have come with get approval and regulation from CMA. You have authority to sell the product. You have authority to sell the product as an institution. You are regulated and you can sell any products from that regulation. Now, whether that particular product is regulated and has been given a CMA approval is a different question. We may have 5 products, 3 of them are actually regulated and approved by CMA. We have 2 that are not. So you need to know whether the particular product, whether the particular fund that you're investing in specifically, not the institution, the fund is actually being given authority and has oversight of CMA. Because the institution may have oversight, but if the fund has no oversight, then you have the risk that comes with it and the exposure that comes with it. Because you go to CMA and they'll sell you, unfortunately, that particular product is not regulated by us, so we can't come in and help you on it. Yet that same firm is selling other products that are regulated. Do NCBA provide special loans for healthcare workers, investment in health services? I'm not in a position to answer that, but you can send us an email or David can just make a quick follow-up with the bank. Being on the investment side becomes, I'm not an expert on the lending side, so I wouldn't really want to misinform you or give information that may not be right. But as a bank, I know we're in the business of offering everybody that we come across our services, and lending is a service that we do as much as we take deposits as a bank. So I'm sure there are products or ways in which we cover the health workers and can assist them and get them in terms of lending side of it.
Right. I think in the interest of time, the discussion could keep on and on, but it's about 8:30 when we usually finish. But rightly from the many, anonymous and other persons, I saw Dorothy Nyong'o saying it was concise presentation and very nice. Another anonymous attendee saying very nice presentation. And I'm sure we all attest that this was very timely and also well elaborate. And personally, I've learned quite a lot. And it's a privilege to have learned and to have gotten this opportunity. So thanks so much, Mr. Mwenda and Mr. Paul, for giving us a lot of information that is important at this time. And so I'm sure we're gauging, the benefits, the risks, what we have, and, putting ourselves into the mirror in terms of where we are at. And it was helpful. So thank you so much. We truly appreciate. So before we finally close, I would want to welcome Dr. Zipporah Ali to give some remarks, and also if she can also introduce the incoming or the current executive director at Kehpca, who is very new. I think this is her 8th day, and then we will be ending shortly. Asante.
Thank you very much, David. I don't know if I need to put my video on, but thank you very much. And Mr. Mwenda and your colleague, Paul Kehpca, thank you very much for this very nice, interesting session. A bit too late for some of us who are retired without having thought of all those things. Should have come earlier. So for those of you who are still young here and are able to do all those investments, please take heed and do them. Don't be like some of us who are now wondering what should we do. But I think it's very important. We decided to kind of move away from all the things that we usually have our sessions presented on health issues, but we also thought financial investment, finances, being in control of our finances, investing, is also part of health, because if you don't have those finances, like you said, then you're not able to have a good healthy life, because you can't pay for your insurance, you can't pay for your medicine. So this is very useful. We have a lot of young people on this CME, so I'm hoping that this is something they are going to take up and follow up with ensuring that their finances are in the right place, are being used in the right way. So asante sana, Mr. Mwenda, that was a very nice, enlightening presentation. And Mr. Kehpca, thank you for your initial introduction. Thank you, David, for organizing for these sessions. And also thank you to, I know Miriam was also with you when you're organizing for the speaker, so thank you to both of you. And also thank you to Howard for being the guy always behind the screen that makes sure things work. I think most of you know me. My name is Zipporah Ali. I've been the executive director of Kehpca. I worked with Kehpca in the leadership position for the past almost 15 years. I retired at the end of May 31st. I'm with the organization for this 1 month, just to ensure there's very smooth transition and no loopholes are left behind by the time I'm leaving. So we have a new ED, a young lady. Unfortunately, I'm being told she's not able to talk. Or are you able to talk, Macklin, or share a video? Your screen, I mean your video.
I'm online.
Oh, you're online now. Yeah, there's a time I was seeing messages that Macklin is not able to talk, not able to. So yes, that is Macklin. That pretty young lady is your new AD. Those of you working with Kehpca, those of you in palliative care. Macklin joined us 2nd of June. She is taking over and has worked many years ago, worked very shortly with us, but has been working with the regional association, Kehpca, in Uganda. And I think we shared the information for those of you who are members of Kehpca, and we shared with our networks that we are having a new ED. And so I really want to say, Macklin, karibu sana, welcome. Welcome to Kehpca. These are very exciting people to work with, people who really do a lot of work in terms of taking care of those who have got life-threatening conditions. And so they have all this, the patience, the love, the resilience, and the information, knowledge, and skills, and just the passion to do this kind of a job. So I think you'll be working with very fantastic people. I think also in these sessions we have been joined by people who are not necessarily in palliative care, but who want to understand what financial, to understand more about these financial investments and everything, because we invited also other people to join. So they are also welcome on this meeting. But yeah, I'm giving this opportunity to you to say hello to the people you'll be working with very closely, as soon you will start going to the field and meeting some of them in person. Karibu sana, maybe you can say a word.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zippy. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you. So I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to be back in Kenya. I'm happy to be part of the great team, the great staff at Kehpca, and even meeting the great members who have joined this meeting, and even many more whom I'll join with time. So for now, I'm really excited. These webinars are very useful, and I'm very, very grateful for all of us making time to come and join. As David has mentioned, I'm still very new, so adjusting and learning the ways of our ways, palliative care, and meeting more partners and new members. So I know in the next few months, I'll catch up and we'll engage more. So thank you for now. And thank you so much for our facilitators. Dr. Zippy has already mentioned and thanked you. It was really a good session and I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Macklin. Next time you'll be the one taking over all these things. So yes, my hair is so uncombed. David, I'm handing over to you to close the session. Thank you very much, everyone. And have a lovely evening. Good night. Stay safe, stay well. Lots of love.
Thank you.
It will always be hilarious. So we saw a comment from somebody from Uganda. I think Akelo, great that you joined and you were able to learn. I saw different friends, people from all parts of the country. And so at least we've learned together. So we close it at that, and we say, let's go invest, let's go make wealth. In the event you need further clarification, in case you have any other questions, I provided the email addresses up there for the friends from NCBA. They are a secure bank. They handle lots of our monies, and so we've been safe with them. So if you need further support and further guidance, please feel free. And if you contact us and you need any other information that we do not have, we'll link you to them. So thank you, and God bless you. Have a good night. We're done. Asanteni.